Hi teachers, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Jessica Tobin. I am the content creator and blogger at Elementary Nest. Today we are going to be discussing ELA checklist. We're going to talk about the benefits of these checklists, and we're going to talk about how to use them to kind of perfect your instruction and really reach every single student that you have in your classroom. So throughout the YouTube video, I'm going to be talking about ELA checklist that I've made. If you don't follow Common Core, or if you have your own checklist, you of course can use that checklist. But the ones that I'm going to be showing and the ones I'm going to be referring to are these free checklists, and I will give you a link later on in the video for the checklist for you to download for free. But they are Common Core, and there are 6 domains in Common Core. And each grade level, K through 4, has, sorry, I don't know how to set this up on the screen, has each of the standards with 3 different columns. So what I'm going to do today is talk about the benefits of using a tracking system, and then how to use that tracking system to alter how you're teaching and what you're teaching. So the first benefit is that it's going to make you more intentional on hitting every single ELA standard. So like I said before, it lists out, or whichever one you use, it's going to list out every single ELA standard that you have. And it's going to have you track every time you teach, every time you reteach, and every time it's mastered. So that's really going to help you be absolutely intentional about hitting every single ELA standard within your expectations. It's going to ensure that you've covered it, it's going to keep you organized throughout the year, and it's going to make lesson planning a lot easier. Benefit number 2, let me pull it up real quick. Benefit number 2, okay, I wanted to make sure I had them in the right order, is progress monitoring your students. So this is going to give you the opportunity to teach a standard, assess how the students do, and then determine whether or not you need to hit a reteach or maybe revisit later in the year. I'm going to talk a little bit later, in about 2 minutes in this video, on revisiting versus mastery of each of the standards. And that's going to help you kind of progress monitor where your students are at, and it's going to help you make decisions for your classroom lesson plans in the future. So benefit number 3 is providing you with effective curriculum planning. And what this means is that you are going to be able to look at what you've taught and see what you need to teach next. So in this case, you may find, I'm looking at these standards, you may find, for example, in your RI, sorry, it's hard to pull this up, in your RI list of standards, you may find that you need to hit ask and answer questions and main topic first, which typically that is covered. And then it goes into making connections on this third one, which not necessarily is the easiest standard to hit after main topic. So I would suggest scaffolding as you see fit based off of this checklist. You're not necessarily going to go in order based off of skill for the students. You will want to look at your list and see where your students are at the beginning of the year, what they're mastering, what they're needing more time with, and then determining what is going to be taught next. So of course, with these checklists, you're also going to have a pacing guide or scope and sequence at the beginning of the year. If you are locked into those pacing guides with your district, that's a different story. However, if your pacing guides are a little bit more flexible, you can use these checklists to kind of determine what logically fits next for your students' needs. Now, benefit number 4 is all about having proper documentation and accountability. And this is going to help you when you are referring back to your administration, or when you're talking to parents, or maybe if you're talking to special education or paraeducator teachers. This is going to help determine what needs to be taught soon, what has been taught soon, and it kind of keeps everything structured and in order for you, that if you need to go and revisit something during a meeting with your principal, you know exactly what date you've taught each skill. And then if you have, you know, a team meeting and you guys sit down and all of your students are struggling, you know, with author's point, and you can see exactly when you taught author's point, if you had to reteach on author's point, and if your students have mastered it or not. So it's really going to help that documentation for outside of your classroom. Throughout the video, I have talked about these 3 columns, which are here. And in these 3 columns, let me pull the one that's not, there we go. In these 3 columns, there is date taught, sorry, it's backwards on my screen, date taught, date retaught, and then date revisited. So when you are teaching a standard, most typically you are going to want to try to teach it twice in a year, especially if it is a bigger standard. So you can mark in the first column when you have taught a standard for the first time. A lot of that is going to be in quarter 1, quarter 2. You're going to see some revisits, quarter 3, possibly even quarter 2 if you saw a huge struggle with your students. And then, of course, a lot of them you're going to see in quarter 4. Now, if you, most typically, hopefully, you're going to see a lot of the columns only checked twice. That'll be your teach and your reteach. Hopefully, you can put a little M or like a little star in the column if you feel like the vast majority of your students mastered that standard. So that's going to be if you teach, so this is SL, so that's speaking and listening. Typically, speaking and listening is harder to assess, but if you are trying to assess SL22, which is recounting key details from a text read aloud. If you feel like you have covered that standard and the students have mastered it on the first teach, that's perfect. You can either put an M or a star in that first column. I do suggest revisiting most standards at least once in the year, but when you feel like they've mastered the standards, you can put your column. Now, if you have taught a harder standard, which I'm trying to think, I'll talk about this one. The making connections is a really, really tricky standard in the informational domain, and that's connecting between series and technical steps. Now, if you teach this in maybe November, and then you reteach it in January or February, and you still feel like your students cannot do that, you know, making connections between the steps or between historical events, you might want to do a third reteach or revisit. And that's, you're going to hopefully see a mastery at that third point. So now let's talk about reviewing your checklist completely, all of them. So what I like to do is I like to suggest 2 full reviews for your checklist. And that means you're going to try to keep these all together, and then twice a year you're going to go through each of your checklist and you're going to see which standards haven't been touched and which standards haven't been mastered. So for your first one, I think I've got this pulled up on my screen. For the first one, I would suggest your first review. Your first review be in December or January. That's going to be mid-year. You're going to see which standards you've taught, if you have mastery on those standards, and which standards still need to be taught. And then your second review, I think, needs to be like March or April. That's going to be, you know, around state testing. It's going to be when you're doing final assessments. That final review is going to tell you if you've got any standards that were just so hard for your students throughout the year. And it's also going to tell you if you forgot to cover a standard or if you didn't have time for a standard. Sometimes that's going to happen with a lot of your language and your grammar standards. They are pushed towards the end of the year for some teachers because it's just very difficult to fit all of your standards in. But if that's the case, maybe April and May can be when you try to fit all of those RF or your L standards into your day. Last 2 pieces that we're going to talk about, let me get these pulled up. These are going to be making the changes to your instruction based off of your students success with the standards that you're teaching. So we have kind of talked about this throughout the video today of giving you an opportunity to have personalized instruction and using your checklist to kind of make changes to your instruction. So you're going to be able to say at the beginning of the year, here's my pacing guide, here's what I intend to teach each week of the year. And then using these checklists, you're going to be able to say, my students do not understand text features at all. We need to reteach. And that's going to kind of change and alter the instructional plan that you made at the beginning of the year, which is totally fine if you have that flexibility. You are going to be able to make these student changes and these instructional changes based off of your students' success with a given standard. So you're going to be able to look and see if they haven't mastered a standard, or if they're on that third column, if they're needing that revisit for that very tricky standard. It's going to give you an opportunity to kind of rearrange your plans, alter your lesson plans. You might need to change the effectiveness of some of the activities you're doing for that standard. So if you have tried XYZ for text features and your students still are not getting that tricky standard, you might need to try a completely new lesson or a completely new activity to see if maybe that revisit or that reteach, they do pick up that standard skill. We're at the end of the video. Thank you guys for sticking with me throughout this video. I did want to add, I'm going to add some links to the side over here, and it's going to be in the description below, but these, like I talked about throughout the video, they are free. If you would like to download them, they are for Common Core, and I have them for K through 4. I do appreciate you guys listening to the video today and watching the video. If you have any comments or any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I will try to get to any and all questions and comments. And please like and subscribe to this YouTube channel so that you can get notifications or have an easy view of the next time I post a video. So thank you guys, and I will talk to you next week with more videos.